You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz for great radio. Get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.
Our natural unalienable rights are now considered to be a dispensation of government, and freedom has never been so fragile, so close to slipping from our grasp as it is at this moment.
Fires of Liberty with Clark and Quinn, setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of Americans.
Don't label us left or right. Our American. Not looking for a war, but we came to fight.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
Somebody's gotta stand up. Stand up. Somebody's gotta do what's right. We're rising cause we're fed up. Got our house in order and got yours in sight. I am American. That's what I am. That's what I think and what I do. American, that's what I am, and I bleed red, white, and blue. And I bleed red, white, and blue. It's not about party, it's about what's right.
Welcome to Fires of Liberty. This is Ken Clark and Ken Quinn. We are your hosts. Welcome for our fourth edition of this radio podcast show. Quinn, I guess I don't necessarily know what exactly it is to call it, but we're out here. We're broadcasting Spreaker.com. We've got a lot of people to thank for giving us this opportunity. You actually are the brainchild behind this. You brought us into this ultimately.
Well, good morning, Ken, and I don't know, brainchild's a pretty strong term there. I don't know if I'd use that, but
I didn't do it.
No, this opportunity came to us by Jonathan Dunn, who reached out to me and offered an opportunity to begin a radio program. And the more we talked about it, the more it sounded very exciting to me. So, just to let folks know what we're doing, Fires of Liberty is a program that we are going to be hosting for who knows how long, hopefully a very long time. And the goal of our program is to educate people on the Constitution, on our founding principles. We are primarily going to focus on Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, which is the amending process, and specifically the convention mode that the states can use to propose amendments to the Constitution, because we are both regional directors for the Convention of States project, and we are in the heat of the battle of actually – this is amazing because this will be historical once we accomplish this. This has never been used before in the history of our country. And so we are encouraging people out there listening to our program, please get involved with the Convention of States project, because we are going to actually use the Constitution as the framers intended to restore the Constitution and to restore federalism and rein in the power of the federal government. So I'm excited about this.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because you said a mouthful right there. And what we're asking for and what we're advocating for is an amendments convention. An amendments convention of the states. That's it. That's all we want. And this convention will propose amendments to the Constitution. Why is that necessary? Now, first of all, that's all it will do. It doesn't rewrite the Constitution. It doesn't do anything weird like that, like our liars that are our opponents that lie about us like to say. It doesn't do that. This is an amendments convention. It proposes amendments. It has absolutely no more power than that. End of story. Period. End of story. But the reason that's important is because we've gotten away from the original document and we are now governed by what is called the annotated convention. Ken and I spent a lot of time on a different show going over that, so I'm not going to bore you with that today. But it is basically the Constitution as defined by the Supreme Court. Every time the Supreme Court makes an amendment, makes a decision, they effectively amend the Constitution. So what we need to do is we need to pass resolutions in 34 states calling for an amendments convention. And this convention, this resolution, has to aggregate with every other resolution that's out there. In other words, it has to be on the same subject. So the resolution itself dictates what can and cannot be discussed at the convention. Quinn, am I right?
Well, yeah, and that's just it. This is a limited convention, and history has proven, the Constitution's clear, that the only topic that can be addressed in the convention is what 2/3, which today would be 34 states, agree on. There's been over 400 Article 5 applications submitted to Congress, and the reason a convention has never been called is because 2/3 of the states have not agreed on a topic. And so I'll share what our topic is. So
real quick, before you do that, of those 400 applications, how many different states have passed them?
I believe all 50 states have passed at least one Article 5 application.
That's what I thought, but I wasn't sure.
I know it's 49. I think it's actually 50 now. I know my state of Maine passed, I believe, 4. So it's fascinating. We'll cover on another episode the history of these applications, because it's a great snapshot of what's happening in the country, because you see the response of the states and what they're trying to do to fix the problems. And I got to be honest with you, when you look at the applications, for the most part, these amendments the states want are great amendments. There's only a couple or maybe that were, I would say, this is not too good, but those never get anywhere. They got no traction, whereas other amendments got very close to actually triggering a convention because of the popularity of it and almost reaching the 2/3.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I mean, there are so many safety checks in this thing. It is actually laughable when people say, oh, it's going to run away. It can't be controlled. I'm to the point now where ridicule is the only thing I care to use, because those people are so out there. They're hunting pink unicorns with fairy dust. That is exactly what they're doing. I mean, really, Quinn? I mean, come on.
Well, we're gonna address in the next segment or so what the naysayers are calling us. They're actually doing a road tour opposing us now, the Convention States Project, and calling it a constitutional convention. And I am going to basically take that argument. I'm going to share with you the evidence they're using to scare legislators from this and give you what the actual truth is, so you'll know the difference between a constitutional convention, which is a convention to draft an entirely new constitution, versus an Article 5 convention, which is a convention to propose amendments to the current constitution. So stay tuned for that. It's going to be a good segment. Get out your notebook. It's going to be some meat and potato time.
Yeah, and we're going to hit that in the third segment today. In the meantime, Quinn mentioned earlier that we're both regional directors for the Convention of States Project. And so what does that mean? What we've got going is we've got chapters in all 50 states. We've got state directors in all 50 states. We've got teams in all 50 states. We've got active legislation in, 30 states right now, Quinn? I mean, something like that?
Yeah, 30 states. We have our application's active right now in this year has been 30 states, and we may have a few more others joining this year.
Well, and to give you an idea of what's going on, yesterday, Tuesday of this week, Arkansas passed our resolution through the Senate. It made it all the way through the Senate. Today, we are going to have a hearing in the House. I'm expecting another victory from Arkansas today. And then, so it's going. I'm in Ohio right now as we speak, getting ready to testify in not my fourth, but the fourth Senate hearing in Ohio. Hopefully we'll get a vote today. But and so we've got West Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina. That's just my region. All right. We've got teams out there, hundreds of thousands of activists, millions of supporters nationwide that really want and understand that this is the only tool we have at our disposal to rein in an out of control federal government, because without it, our federal government will melt us down. They are the ones doing it. It's our fault because we're not reining them in. Article 5 is the tool we use to do it. Convention of States is the project that will get it done. Why? Because we have people just like you, hundreds of thousands of people like you all over the country that are going down to your legislators, that are talking to your representatives and your state senators saying, get this done. And we're starting to have a very major impact. Now, as I told my team in Arkansas last night, the naysayers are going to come out of the woodwork now because we passed through the Senate. And I know that caught them off guard. And I won't go into the history in Arkansas, but we had a very uphill climb in the Senate, and we did it. The vote was 19-12 in the Senate. It was a beautiful
That's awesome.
thing. We had God smiling on us. God's intervention played a major part, but the team never gave up. Quinn, I mean, they never gave up. I'm so proud of those guys. I can't even begin to tell you. Brent Dove, our state director, Randy Alexander, our legislative liaison, Tony Rose. I mean, I could list 100 names. Those guys are working so hard.
I know that's phenomenal, and I'm really excited about what's happening in Arkansas. So that could be actually state number 10 for us.
It could be. It really could be. It's happening quick.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm excited. I'm feeling really good about actually your region and Dave Schneider's region and a few out west. Hopefully, we're going to get some more states on board this year and be into the high double digits. That would be fantastic because as a new state comes on board, it generates a lot more interest and it just fires up the grassroots. And what we're building is a grassroots army. And now my region, we've had some setbacks, but we're in a difficult region, but I think that's going to start to change after a year of what's happening in Washington. I think now, as people realize, this is not a partisan effort. This is about taking away the power in Washington, D.C., regardless of who the president is, regardless of what party is in power. This is an American issue, and it's so exciting to be part of. Well,
and all you have to do is take a look at what's going on now. And in the next segment, we'll dive into that a lot deeper. I mean, we've got Gorsuch, who is in hearings right now to be nominated as a Supreme Court justice. We're going to dive into that in a big way in the next segment. But also take a look at the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, if you will. I mean, Trump ran on repeal and replace. All the Republicans in the House and the Senate ran on repeal and replace. So what are they giving us now? They're giving us milquetoast. All right. All they're doing is amending this thing. It's not going to save anybody any money. That's why you've got the Freedom Caucus out there fighting this. And is it really going to change? So the idea that any president is going to change the actual infrastructure in Washington, D.C., who is going to change the fundamental structure of Washington, D.C. That is what has to be changed. We can send all the great politicians in the world to Washington, D.C., but until they actually fix what's broken, nothing changes. We've got a bloated bureaucracy. Congress is inept. They really have no authority anymore. Now, they like to puff out their chests and pretend that they are the kings of the world, but they're not. I mean, they're not. Am I missing something?
No, that is exactly what we're trying to. Elections, what have elections been doing for us year after year after year is just transferring power back and forth, and we continue to spiral down this abyss where our debt is $20 trillion now. Nothing is changing. Our freedoms are being lost every day. And so the only way, Ken, that we can address this is, like you said, we have got to change the structure. Human nature is not going to change. I don't care how great a person is, how strong they are, what their intentions are for good. Once they get down to Washington, D.C., we all know what happens. The wheeling, the dealing takes place. The special interests get involved, and nothing changes. And so we have got to stop doing the same thing over and over again, expecting something different to come out of it. It's time to go big. And the Convention of States Project, hey, our slogan is a solution as big as the problem. It's real, and it's something that this actually comes from the people. We the people. That's how our Constitution begins. We the people. Well, it's time for we the people to actually use the Constitution, use the tool the framers gave us for the very hour we're facing. And so get involved, folks. Join us at the Convention of States. Go to conventionstates.com. We have a variety of volunteer positions for every state. Check us out. Go to where it says Be a Leader. And please like our Fires of Liberty page on Facebook. Just type in Fires of Liberty, like our page. Typically, after every episode, we'll be uploading this podcast and then also providing links to the information that we're sharing. So you'll get some inside information that you're not going to find anywhere else because just by following our program. So I hope you do that and get involved. Let's save our country.
Quinn, where else can people find our podcast? We're on Spreaker. We're on
Spreaker.com,
Lanterns Buzz.
Lanterns Radio Network. I believe is it lanterns.buzz, I believe, is the URL. Yes.
Lanterns.buzz.
And then you'll find us there as well. So we're learning. We'll get more. We'll get a little bit better with all this. And now the other thing is we're live Wednesday mornings at 9. So if you want to hear it first, make sure you're at lanterns.buzz Wednesdays at 9 a.m. And Ken, why don't you share about the future plans we have for the program?
Okay, we're going to go to a break here, but before we do, we're ultimately going to be doing live broadcasts on Facebook with this podcast. We're going to do it from the Convention of States Project Facebook page, and we're going to do Facebook broadcasts. We're going to be able to have callers call in live while we're doing the show, and it'll actually be live, not pre-recorded. This episode is pre-recorded. And the only reason it is because Quinn and I are in the heat of legislative battles all over the country right now, so we're never home. Like I said earlier, I'm in Ohio right now as we speak. So it's really hard for us to do it live. But ultimately, when all that settles down, we're going to be doing live Facebook broadcasts. We'll be able to take questions live. We'll be able to take callers, the whole 9 yards. So when we come back after the break, because we're going to run to a break right now, we're going to dive into the Supreme Court. We're going to talk about why the Supreme Court is all-powerful. It shouldn't be. What bullet we dodged with this election, etc. But the underlying problem here is the Supreme Court has way more power than it should. We'll be right back.
The Dow dropped nearly 1,000 points.
It's intimidating. It's frightening. The partial government shutdown.
We all know that our government is way off track. The debt is astronomical and is going to cripple not only our own freedom and our own economy, but our children and our grandchildren are going to be effectively slaves paying for all of the things that we're spending money on today. We also know that Washington, D.C. will never fix itself. The Founding Fathers recognized that this was a potential as well. And in Article 5 of the Constitution, they gave us a solution. The states have the power under Article 5 to call a convention of the states for the purpose of proposing amendments to the Constitution. Because sometimes what you need is not a change of personnel, you need a change of structure. The founders understood the importance of structure, and they gave the power to the states to create a new set of rules. When the federal government overstepped its boundaries, we could recalibrate the rules to take power away from Washington, D.C. and give it back to the people and to the states. There's a simple plan for doing this. There are 4,000 legislative districts that are really crucial to us, and we want to have grassroots organizations in 4,000 legislative districts across the country. These are state house legislative districts because the state legislature is what matters. We need you to join with us. We need 100 citizens in each of these districts to be citizen volunteers and local leaders to make sure that Washington, D.C.'s power is taken back and return it to the people. The Founding Fathers understood that structure was an important part of preserving liberty. Please join with us at conventionofstates.com and help us preserve liberty not only for ourselves, but for our children, our grandchildren, and the generations to come.
The Dow dropped.
You know, that's Michael Ferris on that commercial, and he was one of the co-founders of the Convention of States Project. This is a guy that has argued in front of the Supreme Court countless times. Another one of our scholars is a guy by the name of Rob Natelson. His work has been used by the United States Supreme Court. I'm thinking up of 18 different times. I think he has argued in front of the United States Supreme Court. These are some huge minds that have gone into the Article 5, and especially with Professor Natelson, he went into doing his research as a skeptic. He didn't believe in the project. Kind of reminds me of you, Quinn, because you came into this as a skeptic as well.
Yeah, the research done by Nadelson's fantastic, and the conventions of states that he has found in our history, it just shows how the states would come together to deal with issues. And that's all Article 5 is. It's a process that allows the states to deal with issues at the federal level by proposing amendments. And so, what I was amazed that I never heard of before I got involved with this, it was there has been, and we'll talk about this in another episode, there has actually been a convention that did propose an amendment to the U.S. Constitution by the states. It was not technically in Article 5, but the process works. And at the time it was taking place, the country was divided in half. And even still, the process worked. The convention produced an amendment. And so it's just the history on this is phenomenal. And there's a great quote by John Dickinson at the original 1787 Federal Convention. He said, experience must be our only guide. Reason may mislead us. And it's so true, because what has been our experience? And when you look at our experience with this process, that it just is overwhelmingly that it works, and it's something that we need to take advantage of and use in order to save this nation.
Well, one of the things that Quinn and I have decided we want to do with this show is we want to make it topical. We want to talk about the issues of the day. And one of the biggest issues that's going on this week, I mean, Monday and Tuesday was all about the FBI hearings and who's wiretapping who and did the Russians play a part. And I got to tell you, I don't want to talk about that because I am so sick of hearing about that it just drives me insane. But something else that is massively important that's going on this week, because it does, wrongfully so, but it does affect each and every one of us, and that's the makeup of the Supreme Court. I remember the meltdown that the entire nation went into when Justice Scalia died. I mean, everybody was wigged out. Why? Because of one man, one justice who sits on the Supreme Court. Everyone understood that the balance of power on the Supreme Court, and that drives me insane too, because it's not supposed to be political, but it is. And you're going to hear in a clip that we're going to play here in a minute that it is being used to drive social justice, drive an agenda, et cetera, et cetera. It was never intended to be that way. It was never intended to have the kind of power that it does now. The Supreme Court is arguably the strongest and most powerful branch of the federal government today, and that's just wrong. It was originally designed to be the weakest. And so we're going to talk about that. But I mean, right now we've got the confirmation hearings going on for Supreme Court nominee Gorsuch out of Colorado. And it's fascinating to watch this because there are people out there that are just hell-bent on destroying him and others that are trying to support him. And it's fascinating to watch, Quinn.
Yeah, Clark, it's just, you're so right. The Supreme Court never was supposed to have this kind of power over the American people. And, this whole idea of three equal branches of our government, that's not true. It was not intended that all three branches would be co-equal. And just look at the Constitution and the authority of the legislative and judicial and executive. You can see that it's not. And over the years, you mentioned earlier, and we posted this on our previous program, the annotated Constitution. The reason why our country is in the mess it's in today is due to so many of these rulings by the Supreme Court that has expanded the powers of the federal government using primarily the General Welfare Clause and the Commerce Clause and the Necessary and Proper Clause. And what our project intends to do is to basically bring those terms, make them rigid the way what the intention of those terms were, so that there's no more wiggle room. There's no more expanding it beyond what the intent was. And so we'll get into greater detail on some of those issues in later programs. But the Supreme Court today, gosh, you're right. People are, every summer we're just waiting with bated breath. I think it's in June when the rulings from the great Supreme Court come down and how they're going to affect our lives. This is just utterly out of control.
And here's the point that I think everybody needs to understand. When the Supreme Court makes a decision, that decision becomes part of the annotated Constitution, which is what Congress uses as their Constitution. So it becomes effectively an amendment to the Constitution. That's the point. So every time the necessary and proper clause or the commerce clause is abused, it actually becomes part of our quote unquote living document, which is wrong. But that's what they're talking about. Every time they talk about a living document, that's what they're talking about. That there are different philosophies that go into how to drive a Supreme Court nominee. And I think it's important. I'm going to play that clip now, Quinn, because I think it's important that people understand what it is we're talking about. So we're going to go to the third presidential debate between Trump and Clinton so that you can hear how some people view the Supreme Court and what its role actually is. And this is completely wrong. This is so contrary to what our founders wanted. But this is Hillary Clinton. Listen to this.
Go first. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thanks to UNLV for hosting us. You know, I think when we talk about the Supreme Court, it really raises the central issue in this election. Namely, what kind of country are we going to be? What kind of opportunities will we provide for our citizens? What kind of rights will Americans have? And I feel strongly that the Supreme Court needs to stand on the side of the American people, not on the side of the powerful corporations and the wealthy. For me, that means that we need a Supreme Court that will stand up on behalf of women's rights, on behalf of the rights of the LGBT community, that will stand up and say no to Citizens United, a decision that has undermined the election system in our country because of the way it permits dark, unaccountable money to come into our electoral system. I have major disagreements with my opponent about these issues and others that will be before the Supreme Court. But I feel that at this point in our country's history, it is important that we not reverse marriage equality, that we not reverse Roe v. Wade, that we stand up against Citizens United, we stand up for the rights of people in the workplace, that we stand up and basically say the Supreme Court should represent all of us. That's how I see the court, and the kind of people that I would be looking to nominate to the court would be in the great tradition of standing up to the powerful, standing up on behalf of our rights as Americans. And I look forward to having that opportunity. I would hope that the Senate would do its job and confirm the nominee that President Obama has sent to them. That's the way the Constitution fundamentally should operate. The President nominates, and then the Senate advises and consents or not, but they go forward with the process.
You know, I love that. She talks about the Constitution. This is how it should operate, and people's rights, etc. Everybody has the same right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit of happiness meaning property, those ownerships. But she corrupts everything. And that she nails it when she's talking about using the Supreme Court to promote social justice. Forget about the proper role of the federal government. They are talking about promoting their agenda. Quinn, am I missing something here?
You know, and this is something that I don't like about the Constitution, okay? I don't like that a president has the authority to appoint the Supreme Court justices because it does exactly that. It puts the power in one person's hand, basically. I know they have to be confirmed, but what it does, it allows that agenda of that particular president to continue for decades. And that's the problem. It's being used as a political force instead of the rule of law. And, you know, and let me just bring this back to Convention of States. How can our application address this? Well, we have term limits in our application, not just for members of Congress, but also federal officials. So I would like to see an amendment to place term limits on the Supreme Court. But there's other things that we can restructure the Supreme Court to basically get it from being this political body to being more of a court of law. And I believe it was Michael Farris who came up with this idea. Basically, if you look at the justices today, and it's probably been this way for a very long time, most of them do have a Harvard or Yale education, where a lot of this.
Even Gorsuch has a Harvard education.
Yeah. They have other schoolings as well that they've been to colleges, but they all focus on the Yale and the Harvard, and we all know that those those
liberal bastions, if you will.
Yeah,
I'll say it.
They don't quite take the same view of the Constitution as those like you and I, where they go back to the original meaning. What did the words mean? What did the people expect from it? And so, what about doing this? I love this idea. Instead of a president appointing justices, why not allow on a rotational basis the states to appoint Supreme Court justices with a term of, say, 6 or 8 years? That way, we're getting justices from different parts of the country on a rotational basis. They're not there for life, and it just will allow greater variety of thought, greater backgrounds on constitutional interpretation. And see, that alone, Clark, would do wonders on how to reduce the power of the federal government at the Supreme Court level.
Well, and I also think it's important that people understand that when the Constitution was written back in 1787 and they were coming up with the structure of the Supreme Court, the average life expectancy of people was 54 years old. So when they appointed somebody to the Supreme Court, the expected term was 6 to 8 years. It didn't mean 20 years, 30 years, having rulings for a generation. And that didn't give people to, quote unquote, evolve over time. And I mean, give me a break. The Constitution was a brilliant document. The problem is we haven't been able to keep the federal government in the box of the Constitution because we allowed the Supreme Court to amend it every time they come up with a decision. That kind of leads into what we're going to be talking about in the next segment. Now, Quinn, you talked about some of our naysayers, and we're going to hit that and hit it hard when we come back right after this.
The United States Constitution was written to form a more perfect union that would enable checks and balances to prevent a bloody revolution from being a necessary measure to abolish tyranny. Excellent though it was, Colonel George Mason feared the national government might one day end in a tyrannical aristocracy. The rights of the people needed to be secured against potential corruption at the national level. One of the solutions the framers decided upon can be found in Article 5, which gives state legislators the authority to call a convention that bypasses federal legislators to amend the Constitution. That gives we the people the opportunity to make some long overdue structural adjustments. Maybe term limits would be a good place to start. Here's how the process works. Citizens request their state legislators to pass a bill called an application, with operative language identical in each state. These legislators of the states then pass the application. Generally, only a simple majority is needed. Congress shall, by law, call a convention of the states as soon as it receives applications from 2/3 of the state legislatures. That's 34 states. Delegates chosen by the state legislatures attend the convention. Each state only gets one vote at the convention, but they can send as many delegates to represent the state as they so choose. Amendments are proposed, debated, and voted upon at the convention. Finally, ratification takes place in the states. Each amendment must be ratified by 3/4 of the states in order to become part of the U.S. Constitution. Civilizations rise and fall. Let's be a civilization that saw the cycle of collapse coming and broke it.
There you have it. Now, we've got a lot of people out there that'll listen to something like what we just heard as far as that ad is concerned. And they'll come up with all these, and I know I keep going back to this. I keep using the terms pink unicorns and fairy dust, because that's what it is. It is this mythical thing that Article 5 is not. And quite honestly, Quinn, they lie about us. They absolutely lie about us. And I'm not afraid to say that because I think it's true. And I get pretty tired of it, don't you?
Yeah, and I was lied to myself, and that's what really got me digging into this. And so, I came across a video. This is from the John Birch Society, who seemed to be the most vocal out there against us, or at least the most organized opposition that we've had. Because you know why? They've been doing this for 40 years now. So they've been lobbying legislatures to oppose any Article 5 for 40-something years. And so I came across the latest video, and it just really kind of I wanted to address it, and let me go into it. Basically, the segment is the regional director there is saying how a constitutional convention, that Article 5, what they want to do is get people to think that our Article 5 project is a constitutional convention. And when they use the term constitutional convention, so when they use the term constitutional convention, they want people to think that this is exactly like what happened in 1787, where a new constitution is going to be drafted and produced. And so,
Quinn, the kind of gymnastics they go through in order to get that accomplished is amazing. I put myself through college on a gymnastics scholarship, and I got to tell you, I was never that good. I could not come up with these kinds of contortions. Sorry, I just had to interject that.
Yeah, and for a lot of people out there, this is so new to them. I understand that. I get that. But it comes down to two things. It's either, if you believe that an Article 5 convention is a constitutional convention, it's either because of ignorance or it's because of motive. Now, this gentleman's not ignorant, and so his motive is suspect and is obviously to dissuade legislators from using this process. And let me just share what he goes through. You know what he uses to give the definition of an Article 5 convention? You know what he refers to? It's not the framers. He actually refers to Black's Law Dictionary, Clark. to come up with the
what
definition.
Is Black's Law Dictionary? I got to ask.
Black's Law Dictionary is a dictionary written. It was first produced 100 years after the Constitutional Convention. Okay, so why in the world will somebody who claims to be, quote, a constitutional scholar, when trying to determine what the framers meant, why would they turn to a book written 100 years after the fact? So that right there should give you a little red flag going off. So
I think that definitely would. So let's just take a look at the term commerce itself. It's been corrupted over the years. Sorry to interrupt. Keep going.
Yeah, so basically his whole argument is, it's always been called a constitutional convention, and it's only been the last few years that people like us are changing it to be called Convention of States because, we're trying to hide what it is. Well, you know what? Let's just really see what the framers said about this. Let's get to the truth. And the claim in his segment is he's debated people on Facebook, hundreds of people, and none of them have ever produced any fact or source to prove that it's not a constitutional convention. Well, buddy, here's your facts. Here's your truth. So let me just go through this. Okay. Number one, and any fifth grader can understand this. Read the words of Article 5. Does Article
Here we go.
5,
let's use the actual text.
Let's actually use the text. And what does the text say? I'm just going to pull up that little section. Where is it today? All right. Well, let me just read it here. Real simply, the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments.
Let me stop you right there. Whoa. Come on, because Article 5 in the actual text itself says shall call a convention for proposing amendments. Now, I'm sorry, what's the definition of proposing? Does that mean rewrite the Constitution? Amendments. The definition of amendments actually means rewriting the Constitution, right? And a convention actually means what? I'm confused. So you're telling me that a convention for proposing amendments only means proposing amendments, Quinn? Is that what you're telling me? My mind is going to blow up.
Yeah, well, let me help with your confusion there, because I'm going to continue the rest of the sentence, which in either case, regardless if it's Congress or the states proposing, shall be valid to all intents and purposes as parts of this Constitution.
Oh boy.
So it's obvious that these would be amendments that would be added, if ratified, to our current Constitution, not a new Constitution. All right, so that's point number one. So, that should hopefully would be enough for most people. But let me give you some more facts so that you're not deceived by this nonsense anymore. Immediately after the convention mode was passed at the 1787 convention, do you know what motion was made? A motion was made to make Article 5 a true constitutional convention. Let me just read to you what happened.
Okay.
Mr. Sherman moved to strike out of Article 5 after, quote, legislatures, unquote, the words of 3/4. And so after the word conventions, leaving, listen to this, leaving future conventions to act in this matter like the present convention, according to circumstances. So a motion was made to make in Article 5 a constitutional convention like it was in 1780. Guess what happened, Ken? They voted it down. They rejected that idea. They did not want to give it that same authority. Okay, so right there,
So wait
back.
a minute. You're saying that during the actual debate of all this, they were trying to decide whether or not they should give the states the power to rewrite the Constitution as opposed to amend the Constitution?
Yeah,
Is that what you're saying?
They limited Article 5 to only proposing amendments, even though they wanted to expand the authority. So right there in the notes of the convention itself, you see that there's two types of conventions, okay? Number 3, none of the people at the ratifying conventions called it a constitutional convention. They always referred to Article 5 as a convention for proposing amendments.
Well, then I'm confused. Where does this con idea come from, or constitutional convention come from?
Yeah, well, you know,
I know the answer.
Well, yeah. Well, why don't you share the answer, Ken?
Well, it comes from back in the 1970s after Chief Justice of the Supreme Court gave us Roe v. Wade. There was a movement afoot throughout the country, an Article 5 movement to overturn Roe v. Wade using Article 5, to propose an amendment to the Constitution to get rid of Roe v. Wade. So Phyllis Schlafly, for reasons unknown, and she took these reasons to her grave, decides to reach out to Justice Berger, who wrote that decision, and ask him about Article 5. He had never written about it prior and never wrote about it after. So he comes up with this letter that he wrote to Phyllis Schlafly debunking the Article 5 as a runaway, as a constitutional convention, as limitless. And then all of a sudden, con and runaway convention, those terms were born. Never before the lexicon of the United States language were those terms ever prevalent, until Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Robert Berger, used it because he used it to demagogue the Article 5 movement, because he did not want to be one of those Supreme Court justices that had his signature decision overturned by an amendment, which has happened 2 times in the past. Remember the 11th Amendment. That was done to overturn an out-of-control Supreme Court, right, Quinn? I mean, there you have it.
Yeah, in modern times, the most of that has come out of that the 60s and 70s. It also goes back to, there were some conservative amendments back in the early 60s that the states wanted, and some folks on the other side, the liberal side from the Yale and Harvard side, started writing articles calling it a constitutional convention to prevent those amendments from being presented. So yeah, this is all drummed up as a fear technique to stop the states from ever calling one of these things. And so when you go back to the original intent and the meaning of it, the folks never considered an Article 5 convention as a true constitutional convention.
It amazes me that some of the people that argue against us are militantly pro-life. I give you NAGR and RNGO, and they use Justice Berger's talking points against us. It makes no sense.
So yeah, it really doesn't. But let me give some more evidence. So I make this point. I'm going to drive this thing home. Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 85 describes the 2 types of conventions right there in the Federalist, the closing arguments. Let me just quote him. Quote, "This is not all. Every constitution for the United States must inevitably consist of a great variety of particulars in which 13 independent states are to be accommodated in their interest or opinions of interest. We may, of course, expect to see in any body of men charged with its original formation very different combinations of the parts upon different points. Many of those who form a majority on one question may become the minority on a second, and an association dissimilar to either may constitute the majority on a third. Hence, the necessity of molding and arranging all the particulars which are to compose the whole in such a manner as to satisfy all the parties to the compact." What he's describing is a constitutional convention because you have to have unanimous consent amongst all the states involved for a new constitution. Then he goes on and says this, "But every amendment to the Constitution, if once established, okay, after a Constitution is established, would
An
be
amendment's established.
No, once a Constitution is established.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
But every amendment to the Constitution, if once established, would be a single proposition and might be brought forward singly. There would then be no necessity for management or compromise in relation to any other point, no giving nor taking. The will of the requisite number would at once bring the matter to a decisive issue, and consequently, whenever 9 or rather 10 states, so that's your 2/3 and your 3/4, were united in the desire of a particular amendment, that amendment must infallibly take place. There can therefore be no comparison between the facility of effecting an amendment and that of establishing in the first instance a complete constitution. Is that clear or what?
That is clear as crystal to me. But I mean, how? And that just brings me up to this question: how can people take a look at that and say, "Oh, that really doesn't matter"? I mean, it does matter, and they throw it out. I mean, how many times? It's this. It goes back to the same old adage: a lie told once it breaches around the world is then is supposedly the truth. But you and I both know better, and our listeners know better, that a lie is still a lie, no matter how many people believe it. It's still a lie.
It still is. And, let me close out the one last point. And they like to refer to this letter. They don't, obviously, whenever they refer to this letter, they for some reason leave out this part. But this was a letter by James Madison. He wrote this to George Lee Turberville in 1788. I'm just going to read one sentence. Quote, "A convention cannot be called without the unanimous consent of the parties who are to be bound by it, if first principles are to be recurred to, or without the previous application of 2/3 of the state legislatures, if the forms of the Constitution are to be pursued." What he's discussing there are a constitutional convention is for first principles, the foundation. An amendments Constitution, Article 5, is for forms. And so right there in that one sentence, you have two different conventions. And the bar for a constitutional convention is much higher than an Article 5 convention. It takes unanimous consent. If a state does not ratify a new constitution, they're not bound by it. However, if 3/4 of the states ratify an amendment, all 50 states are bound to it. So there's a lot of differences there between the two types of conventions. But I just wanted to present the facts and just debunk this myth that a constitutional convention is an Article 5 convention for proposing amendments. Completely different characters, completely different creatures. Let's know the truth out there.
Well, and before we go to break, I just have one other thing to add to that, Quinn, because I think you wrapped that up very, very nicely. But the states don't need to invoke Article 5 in order to rewrite the Constitution. They can do that any time they choose. The only reason you invoke Article 5 is so that you can limit the convention, the amendments convention, to the purposes of proposing amendments. That's it. Otherwise, why would you stay within the framework of the Constitution? It makes no sense. We will be right back right after this. In September of 2016, Citizens for Self-Governance organized the first ever simulation of an Article 5 Convention of States. About 130 commissioners representing all 50 states participated in a test run of this constitutional solution to a runaway federal government.
It was the most extraordinary thing in my career that I've ever been a part of.
This historical event was held in colonial Williamsburg, Virginia. Thousands of Convention of States supporters across the nation participated in watch parties to view the event's spellbinding proceedings. The convention rules were compiled by Professor Robert Nadelson and edited by a caucus of about 200 state legislators. Citizens submitted thousands of amendment ideas for the commissioners to review. 3 committees eventually whittled it all down to 8 proposals. 6 of these 8 were successfully adopted by the Convention of States simulation. Proposal 1 provides for restraints on the national debt. Proposal 2 would restore the Commerce Clause back to its original intent. Proposal 3 places term limits on members of the United States Congress. 4 allows for a way by which a supermajority of the states can repeal a federal law. Proposal 5 places a permanent limit on federal taxation. Proposal 6, a process for Congress to repeal federal regulation. Additionally, the convention voted to adopt a statement that said they also recommend a balanced budget amendment and restraints on the fiscal judiciary.
You have proven beyond a shadow of a doubt to the country that the people of the United States of America are ready to hold the first Article 5 convention in the history of this country. I congratulate you, I salute you, and may God bless you. Thank you very much.
For more information, please visit www.conventionestates.com/COSSIM. And there you have it, Mr. Quinn. We have just about 4 minutes left. And so we just want to wrap this up, but you had just sent me a note saying an Article 5 convention is not a constitutional convention. You spent the last segment talking about that. Go ahead and wrap up that statement.
Yeah, I just I wanted that to be the title of this, because if more people are aware, especially legislators, I know, I still hear it amongst legislators that, we don't want to open up the Constitution. We're not opening up the Constitution. And I've said it in a previous, and you've said this too, Ken, Congress can propose amendments any day they're in session. And in fact, they've done it 12,000 times. And
12,000 times. How come I thought it was 10,400?
Oh, that was probably that was last year. No. Well, no, seriously, every Congress there's an average about 150, 200 amendments every Congress. And so so they're up to 12,000 now. And the 11,500, that was back in 2014. And so all we're seeking is the very same opportunity that Congress has taken advantage of 12,000 times. That's it. It's to give the states an opportunity to restore the balance of power between the national government and the state governments. And we have got to do this. And so if you're out there, I hope my little brief history there has clarified the difference between a constitutional convention and an Article 5 convention. And I'm hoping that you are willing to get involved, because we need you involved. It's knowledge is great, but knowledge without implementing that knowledge, especially where we are now, folks, we need you involved. So please join the Convention of States Project in whatever state you're in. Get involved and help us out.
Knowledge without action is worthless.
Without action. Exactly.
Knowledge without action is absolutely worthless. You can be the biggest brainiac, know everything about everything, but if you sit on your couch all day and read books, guess what? You're going to sit on your couch all day and read books. You can go out and teach people about your knowledge. That's action. You can go out and get involved in the Convention of States Project. That's action. You can help people get elected because that's important. We're not trying to discount that and say it doesn't matter, because it does matter. But there is so much more that you can do. Knowledge without action doesn't do anybody any good. And so you have got to become an activist. And, there are people out there that like to do a lot of different things. Some people like to sit behind a keyboard and do that. Other people like to be out in front of crowds and give speeches and do that. Other people like to work behind the scenes, put on events, talk to legislators. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your skill set is. We have a job for you. And so, Quinn, we've got about a minute left. And so I just wanted to wrap this up. But man, I'll tell you, it requires people like the Arkansas team, like the Ohio team, like all the other teams across the country that are doing it every single day. Quinn, that's what it takes.
It takes a commitment. And folks, when when I think about the framers and what they did to give us freedom and the sacrifices they made, and all we're asking is a little bit of your time. With what they went through for what they gave us, how can we not step up and get involved to save what they did? And so,
yeah, you cannot get bogged down in fear, because fear is crippling. It reduces you to the fetal position, which is what we see our opponents promoting, and they want to do nothing. Now, they come up with all these quote-unquote solutions. Yeah, let's just elect the right people, or nullification, or blah, blah, blah. Those are not real solutions. Article 5 is a real solution.
The time for fear is over. It's time to be fearless, and we need people stepping up to be leaders in their states. And so let's get this done, folks. Join the cause of freedom, and help us set brush fires and freedom around the country. That's what we're asking you to do. So I'm looking forward to the next segment, the next podcast, man. Hey, good luck today. Godspeed.
Thank you, sir.
Where you are, and we hope things go well for you, man.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for joining us today. We will be back next week. It should be a lot of fun. God bless.
Red, white, and blue is our way of life. Never back down from a challenge or a fight. Nature provides, God gives the rights. We're Americans.
You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz. For great radio, get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.